Hi there, welcome to our channel. In this video, I will tell you a story of Hachishaku-sama, a Japanese horror figure that emerged in the 1990s and early 2000s. She is a towering woman in white who preys on children, and her terrifying po-po-po call has haunted the nightmares of countless people. We have a detailed explanation of her legend in our archive, so check that out if you are interested. And before we begin, let us know in the comments which Japanese horror story you'd like us to cover next as a spooky, sleepy story. Your suggestion might be the one we bring to life in the next video. Alright now, let the story begin, and I wish you a very good sleep. Good night. I was 12 the summer the cicadas sounded like screaming clocks. My parents put me on the Shinkansen with a backpack full of manga and a Walkman that ate cassettes. It was July of 2009, and they both promised to visit next weekend for sure, the same way they promised each other 1,000 things I'd stopped believing. I didn't mind being shipped to the countryside. Back then, I thought every problem could be outrun if you moved fast enough. Grandma's village didn't have a station so much as a concrete step that trains decided, occasionally, to pity. The heat hit me first, wet like being wrapped in a hot towel. The air smelled like soy sauce and damp dirt and the sweet rot of fallen plums. The mountains were so close, it felt like you could lean against them. Between the road and the hills, the rice paddies shone like mirrors, and the frogs were tuned to a note you can only hear if you once lost your way in a field at night. I dragged my suitcase down the 2-lane road. Grandma's house sat at the end of a gravel path, behind a hedge that had grown wild enough to be its own person. It was an old house with sliding doors that sighed and a roof that kept the rain out the way a good grandmother keeps secrets. Wind chimes clinked at the eaves. A bamboo ladle leaned against the stone basin by the entrance, and a black cat slept on the step like a guardian who had decided everyone was fine for now. "Akido!" Grandma called, coming barefoot across the tatami to hug me at the threshold. She was small and soft and smelled like menthol and miso, a scent I still can't pass in a market without going somewhere else in my head. Grandpa followed, wiping his hands on a towel, eyes bright behind gold-rimmed glasses. "You got taller," he said, which is what grandparents are required by law to say, even if you've shrunk. "Hungry?" "Yes," I said, which is what grandsons are required by law to say, even if they've just eaten a train station tonkatsu the size of a sandal. We ate cold salmon with ice rattling in the bowl and cucumbers smacked with a knife until their seeds woke up. A fan groaned in the corner, doing its best. Grandpa asked about school and said, at every answer in a way that made me keep talking. Grandma complained about the humidity, the price of eggplant, and how the last typhoon had knocked over her morning glories. She'd tied them back up with red string, which she said was lucky. I had no idea then how many strings would end up woven through the days that followed. "Don't wander too far," Grandpa said as I got up to unpack. "The fields look like a map, but maps lie." He said it smiling, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. I spent the afternoon exactly how a 12-year-old city kid spends an afternoon in a place with more bugs than people. I went outside with a plastic net and a jar and pretended I was brave. I chased dragonflies that dodged like fighter jets and a rhinoceros beetle that I swear gave me the finger. The road past the house sloped down toward the paddies, where narrow concrete ditches carried water that made a sound like someone whispering too low to catch words. Farther on stood a knot of cedar trees, and beyond that, a scatter of old stones leaning into one another like drunk uncles. Grandpa called that patch of ground the old graveyard, which I thought was redundant and therefore pretty cool. The village during the day was empty in a way cities can never be. Everyone hid from the heat. Laundry hung like flags of surrender. Someone's radio played the baseball game in a hiss of static. The elementary school, where Grandma used to clean classrooms before her knees began to argue, sat quiet as a closed mouth. I followed a narrow footpath between two paddies, my net over my shoulder like I knew what I was doing. The mud made a polite sound when it let me go. I was thinking about absolutely nothing, which is the best thing to think about when you're 12, when something moved behind the hedge on the lane above me. I didn't see it. I felt it first, the way you feel when someone stands up at the back of a classroom. That subtle shift in air that says a new shape has entered the algebra of the day. I turned. The lane ran along the top of a low stone wall, with a hedge planted thick along its edge. Above the hedge was the sky, a blurry watercolor of heat. And above the hedge, higher than it should have been, something light-colored slid through the frame of leaves. For a second, I thought it was a piece of laundry blown off someone's line. Then it dipped and rose in a rhythm that made me take a step backward without deciding to. The cicadas rattled, a crow shouted at nobody. Then, somewhere beyond the hedge and the road and the rattle of the fan back in our house, a sound unrolled across the paddies. Po, po, po. It was soft, almost playful. The way someone might tease a baby with a syllable that doesn't mean anything but feels good in the mouth. I didn't think of a ghost. I thought of a delivery scooter chugging along the main street. I thought of an old lawnmower. I thought of anything else. 12-year-old boys contain whole toolboxes of denial. Po, po, po. It came again, spaced just so, like something taking its time. "Hello," I said, because I was an idiot. A head rose above the hedge. I know memory is an unreliable narrator. I know the years add inches to monsters the way grandmothers add inches to grandchildren with their eyes. But my memory and my fear have never disagreed about this part. The hat appeared first. A straw sun hat, the kind old farmers wear in the fields, broad and practical. Beneath it, long black hair spilled over shoulders that were too level, too still. The face was in shadow, and for one hopeful moment I thought it was tilted down to peer through the leaves. Then I realized that even with the head bowed, even with the hedge and the lane and the stone wall between us, her chin would have cleared the top of the hedge if she'd lifted it. She was tall. Not model tall. Not basketball tall. Not tall the way my 7th grade gym teacher was tall. She was tall in the way cranes are tall when you forget they belong to humans. Tall in the way telephone poles are tall when you're underneath them and the wires hum in your teeth. She didn't move. The hat didn't tilt. The hair didn't swish. Only the stillness moved, pushing everything else away to make room for itself. Her hands were not on the hedge. That part is important to me. I don't know why. It means she was not using it for balance. It means nothing had to hold her up. My throat went small. Somewhere to my left, a frog leapt into the water with a sound like a coin dropping into a pocket. The sun pressed on my shoulders. A dragonfly blurred and righted itself, deciding it had somewhere else to be. Po, po, po. The sound didn't come from her. That's the part that doesn't work. The part that makes me think memory edits for story. The sound came from the fields, from the road, from the sky, from nowhere. It came from inside my teeth. I did the second stupidest thing I did that summer. I waved. The hat tipped. No, not a nod. Not a hello. It lowered, as if the string at the crown had been pulled down a centimeter. The motion was small and precise, and then the hat began to move along the hedge, gliding as if the ground itself had gone smooth under her feet. She didn't bob the way people do when they walk. She didn't step around the gap where a neighbor's bush had died. She slid. I ran. Mud tried to keep me. I didn't care. I scrambled up the stone wall, skinning my knee, sprinted along the lane, past the post box, past Mrs. Tanaka's house with the 4 plastic windmills turning in place above her leaks. The path to Grandma's stood open. The wind chime said a silver thing, and I didn't realize I was crying until the fan hit my cheeks and made them sting. Grandma grabbed my arms. What happened? Akito. What happened? A woman, I said, because that was a manageable word. A tall. There's someone. By the road. She. Where? Grandpa asked. He was already slipping on his old sandals. The hedge, I said. On the lane. She was watching. Grandpa froze so quickly, it was like someone had said his name in a voice that made commands into facts. He didn't look at me. He looked at Grandma. Something heavy passed between them in silence. Did she say anything? He asked. Did you hear any sound? I hesitated. I knew the right answer wasn't the truth, but I was 12 and it was still a year before I learned to lie for the sake of other people's peace. Po, I said. She said, Po, post office. Po, like that. Grandma's fingers dug into my arm so hard I yelped. She let go at once, as if burned. I had never seen her frightened. I had seen her angry, tired, triumphant over a good sale on fish. But fear carved new lines in her face, like writing that had been there all along, but hidden until the paper was held to the light. Close the doors, Grandpa said. All of them. What is... Close them. Grandma moved the way you move when something in your bones is older than your knees. She slid the shoji shut with a sharp clap I had never heard from paper doors. She latched the wooden storm doors. She pulled the little brass pin on the kitchen window that I'd never seen anyone bother with. The house drew itself in and made itself small. Grandpa took my wrist and pulled me into the tatami room that smelled faintly of sandalwood. He knelt, the way old people kneel without complaint, and slid open the narrow drawer of the household shrine. Inside lay a stack of folded paper, a brush, a small jar of ink, and a string of beads that had seen 1,000 prayers. He didn't take the beads. He took the papers. What's happening? I asked, hovering at the edge of that kind of terror people like to call irrational, as if a lack of evidence makes a thing less true to the person who is feeling it. Grandpa didn't answer at first. He tugged the papers free and handed them to Grandma, who began to paste them. One above the lintel, one beside the window, another above the inside of the front door. They were narrow rectangles, each brushed with characters I didn't know then and can't write now. I know their name now, Ofuda. I did not know then that I would come to know it so well that saying it would feel like touching my tongue to a coin. Akito, Grandpa said finally, gently, as if we had time for gentle. Did she see you see her? I thought of the way the hat had dipped. I thought of how the stillness of the hedge had shifted to make space for a new arithmetic. Yes, I said. Grandpa exhaled through his nose. He did not curse. He did not say damn or shit, or even the Japanese equivalent of banging a thumb and apologizing to the gods for the noise. He said softly, I'm sorry. For what? For not telling you the story before you met it. He sent me to the kitchen with instructions that felt like riddles. Don't stand too close to the window while you fill the kettle. Don't look into the garden if you hear anyone call your name. If the phone rings, let it ring. Every rule looked like it had been carved out of a previous mistake. The kettle rattled. Grandma's hands shook as she lit the gas under the pot for tea. I reached out to steady her and she flinched, then patted my fingers as if the flinch had been my fault. Hachishaku, she murmured, more to herself than to me. Maybe more. What's that? I asked. An old way to measure, she said. A grown man is about 5 shaku. Your grandfather is less now. She tried to smile and made a thing that looked like one. An origami version. 8 shaku is too much. She didn't explain further. I didn't press. It took me years to understand the kind of fear that makes explanations feel like doors. In the living room, the old tube TV showed a commercial with a cartoon dog selling insurance. The sound was turned down, but the dog bobbed his head in that cheerful, bouncing way that made everything else feel like it was moving against a stronger gravity. I remember wishing the dog a quiet death. Grandpa made 3 phone calls, each as short as an apology. Yes, he said into the receiver. The boy, by the hedge, this afternoon. A pause. Number not yet, tonight. Another pause. Hi, I understand. He hung up and looked at me in a way that made me feel like furniture, like something that needed to be moved carefully but had no say in where. Tonight, he said. The priest will bring charms to keep you safe. Safe from what? I asked, because someone needed to show up with a question, and I was the only person in the room who hadn't already decided on answers. Grandpa's mouth worked. He looked at Grandma. She shook her head in a way that said, he has to know. He looked back at me. Sometimes, he began, something in the world grows wrong. Not evil, exactly. Just wrong. Like a bone healed crooked. In the old stories, those wrong things like to lean on the young because the young are soft and the wrong things want to sink in. There is one of those wrong things that walks very tall, and when it takes a liking to a boy, it makes a sound like a toy horn. Post office. Post office. Po. He was trying to make it sound like a story. Stories are for children. But I wasn't a child in that room anymore, and this wasn't a story. The priest will set charms, he finished. You will sleep inside, and you will not answer if you hear any voice. Not mine, not your grandmother's, not any neighbor, no matter what they say. Do you understand? I understand, I lied, because there is a first time for everything. We ate early, rice and grilled mackerel and miso soup that scalded my tongue, which felt earned. Grandpa kept glancing at the clock like a man trying to make time fight fair. The priest arrived just before the sky turned the color of old copper. A lean man with a face that lined more when he smiled than when he frowned. He brought a white cloth bag and a kind of calm that made even the black cat stop washing its paws and listen. He greeted Grandma and Grandpa by their childhood names, which told me everything I didn't know. He looked at me a long moment, then at the doors, the windows, the ceiling, as if asking the house itself for consent. You're taller every summer, he said to me in a tone that made it impossible to argue, then knelt and began to place the ofuda with a precision that made them look like a sentence written on the skin of the house. He set a small bowl of salt in each corner of the tatami room and a stubby candle in a dish by the veranda. He gave me a folded piece of paper rubbed with a faint red seal and told me very quietly to put it under my pillow and not take it out for any reason, not even if it got hot under my cheek and sweaty. He told me to keep my eyes on the ceiling if I grew afraid. He told me that fear moves like wind through tall grass. visible from above if you know how to see it. When he finished, he bowed his head. Grandma and Grandpa bowed too. I tried to mimic them and felt like a cheap knockoff, which I was. "Tonight," he said to me, "you will hear things. It will be difficult not to look. It will be more difficult not to answer. But you will not answer." "What if—" I started, then stopped because the end of the question tasted like something foul. "What if she says she has your mother on the phone?" He finished gently. "What if she sounds like your friend? What if she sounds like me? You will not answer." "What if she sounds like you?" I repeated, trying to sew the words into the part of my brain that controls hands. The priest touched 2 fingers to my forehead, just at the hairline. His skin was cool. "You will not answer," he said again, "till dawn. Then you will leave this village and you will not come back for a long time. Your grandfather will explain. I am sorry. I wish it would be otherwise." He left before dark. People who know old things do not like to be outside when the sky can still decide which way it will go. Grandma made up a bed for me in the inner room, the one without a window. The futon looked like a small white boat that might or might not float. Grandpa set the phone off the hook and hung a towel over the clock. "To keep time from watching you," he said with a solemnity I did not understand at the time and have never fully stopped resenting since. The house settled into its nighttime creaks. The cat vanished. The crickets tuned their legs. Far away, a truck downshifted on the main road and made the kind of sigh engines make when they think no one is listening. I brushed my teeth, trying not to look into the mirror longer than I had to. I turned off the light and lay down on the futon, the paper charm crisp and foreign under the pillow, like a book I'd borrowed in a language I couldn't read. I pulled the sheet up to my chin and stared at the ceiling like the priest had told me to. I tried to count the small stains in the plaster, but they kept arranging themselves into shapes I didn't like. The house breathed. My heart learned a new tempo. I became aware of every sound, the distant trickle in the ditch, the tick of cooling wood, Grandma moving softly in the kitchen, the clock muffled under its towel making a ghost heartbeat. Midnight in the country is louder than midnight in the city. In the city, the noise is constant and domestic, like a good dog. In the country, it prowls, it lifts and dips, it tests the fence. It learns your name. Somewhere after the point where the dark is no longer a color and becomes a temperature, I heard it again. Not far, not near, not anywhere you can point to with a finger without your finger learning to shake. Po, po, po. It spread across the house like heat, finding the places you didn't know were cold. I kept my eyes on the ceiling. I pressed my tongue hard against my front teeth, like a man holding a door. Po, po, po. Footsteps came next, soft and heavy at the same time, which doesn't make sense unless you've heard them. They paced the length of the veranda, paused, paced back. Something brushed the outer wall at a height where nothing should brush a wall. The wind chime did not move. The salt in the bowls didn't hiss, which I had half hoped they might. Then came the first voice. "Akito," Grandma said from the hall, in a whisper she only used when I had a fever. "It's hot in there, isn't it? Come out. I'll open the door for a little breeze." I bit my tongue hard enough to taste metal and kept my eyes on the ceiling. The ceiling looked back without sympathy. Outside, a moth threw itself against the paper of the shoji and made a sound like fingertips. The voice went away. It came back as Grandpa, low and calm, offering me cold barley tea in the sports section. It came back as my mother on the phone, breathless and apologizing, saying she'd taken an earlier train after all, and was waiting at the gate. Could I just come tell her which one? Every time the voice spoke, the sound that was not a voice kept time. Po, po, po. Eventually, the voices went away, as if bored. The footsteps ceased. The world held its breath. I released mine by slow, unsteady permission. The candle by the veranda burned a smell into the house that made me think of funerals. I kept my eyes on the ceiling and tried to count the stains again. One looked like a crane with a broken neck. One looked like the map of Japan if someone had snapped Hokkaido off and hidden it behind their back. One looked like the hat I had seen above the hedge. Akito? This voice was not at the door. It was not in the hall. It was right above my face, where a voice has no business being unless a person is bent over you so close you can feel what they had for dinner. I did not move my eyes from the ceiling. I learned, in that second, how to hold still as if stillness were a full-time job. Akito, look at me. It was not my grandmother. It was not any woman. It was not a voice you could find the throat for. It was the memory of a voice wearing a person-like clothes. The ceiling blurred. Tears have a way of trying to rescue your eyes by drowning them. Po, po, po. It came softer this time, but I heard it in the bones of the house. I heard it in the nails. I heard it in the towel over the clock. I heard it in the starch of the paper charm under my pillow, which had become so hot it felt like it might fuse to the fabric. Look at me, the voice said again, patient as summer. I did not look. I didn't sleep either. I lay there while the hours pulled themselves over the mountains one by one, and the birds began, who are the bravest and therefore the stupidest creatures we know. The ceiling stains rearranged themselves into nothing at last. The candle went out the way an old man goes out, with a little fuss that convinces nobody. The footsteps moved away, steps counted in centimeters. The not voice unwrapped itself from the air. At dawn, the priest returned, and with him came the sound the world makes when it remembers it was built for people. Kettles boiling and a bicycle bell and the low argument of two dogs about a matter both believed to be urgent. The priest collected the salt bowls and the candle stub and took the towel off the clock. He removed the ofuda one by one and folded them with a reverence that felt like an apology. "You did well," he said to me and patted my shoulder. "Now you must go." "Go where?" I asked. "Away," he said. "How long?" "For a while," Grandpa answered for him. "We'll pack your bag." There was no discussion of whether I wanted to go. Children are carried downstream by decisions made upstream. We move with the current and pretend we chose the river. Grandma tucked rice balls into a cloth and pressed the bundle into my hands like medicine. She didn't meet my eyes. The priest stood by the gate with his hands folded and watched the road like a man waiting for a storm he has already named. As we loaded the trunk, I looked back at the house that had been a boat and thought of the voice that had tried to climb inside my name. I thought of the hat above the hedge and how the hedge had seemed smaller than it used to be. I thought of the word away and wondered whether it has a border. I climbed into the back seat. Grandpa started the engine. The black cat appeared from nowhere and sat in the middle of the path, as if counting us. The wind chime gave one dry clink. Dawn made a poor excuse for morning. We pulled onto the lane. The mirror threw the house back at me in miniature, a toy I could pocket if I lied about my intentions. As we reached the bend by the hedge, the cicadas wound themselves up again. That was when, from somewhere not near and not far, a wordless sound drifted over the paddies like a hand skimming water. Po, po, po. I did not turn around. I don't know, even now, if the sound was meant for me or if it was only the world clearing its throat. But I can tell you that the village did not shrink in the rear window the way things are supposed to. It stayed the same size, as if attached by a string, until the road twisted behind a stand of cedars and hid it, and the string ran through my chest like a thread left for later. We drove. The mountains kept their distance. A scarecrow in a field turned its cloth head as if to follow us. Grandpa didn't speak. His hands at 10 and 2 were steady as tools. In the front seat, a paper bag rustled with the breath of the rice balls. The car smelled like dust and old vinyl and the peppermint Grandma had pressed into my palm and that I had, without thinking, stuck to the seat. It would be there for years. At the top of the hill where the radio picks up the city station, Grandpa cleared his throat. "We won't be back for a while," he said, as if I hadn't noticed. "Your grandmother will come to visit you in Tokyo when it's safe." "When is safe?" I asked. "When the thing that noticed you notices someone else," he said, and then looked like he wished he hadn't. We didn't talk after that. I watched the village slide away through the glass, its shapes rearranging into landscape the way names become nouns when you stop using them. A pagoda that belonged to another town speared the sky like a bookmark. I'd always liked it. The road rose. The mirrors went full of trees. The sound in my mouth faded until it was only a memory of itself. The priest had said I mustn't come back for a long time. I was 12. I thought long meant a month. I did not know yet that some roads loop so far you come back as someone else. Back then, I believed in escape. Back then, I thought a door could be a boundary. Back then, I didn't know that sometimes you leave a place and the place decides it would rather not leave you. I pressed my forehead to the window, and the glass cooled the part of me the night had warmed too much. In the reflection, I saw my face, thin and serious, and trying too hard to be older than it was. Behind my face, for just a heartbeat, the sky over the paddies darkened as if a cloud had passed across the sun. Then the cloud was gone. The mountains receded. The city belched its warm breath ahead of us. We drove on. When we pulled into my parents' Tokyo apartment block later that afternoon, I thought the village would shrink away in the rearview mirror, like a dream that dissolves in the light of day. That was how the world usually worked when you were 12. Change the scenery, and the rules reset. Tokyo was alive in a way the countryside never was. Vending machines hummed like they were full of bees, and the sidewalks pulsed with people who didn't know my name. My parents' street was lined with noodle shops, laundromats, and a convenience store where the clerk always looked half asleep. Even in the hot breath of July, the air smelled like ramen broth, asphalt, and the ozone crackle of subway lines running underground. It felt safe, or it should have. Grandpa carried my small suitcase all the way up the narrow concrete stairs without a word. My parents met us at the door, both wearing smiles that were too wide, stretched so tight they might tear if you touched them. They hugged me quickly, but their eyes slid past me to Grandpa, like they wanted confirmation I was intact. "Thank you for bringing him back," my father said, bowing. Grandpa only nodded. His face was lined, unreadable, but I noticed he didn't take off his shoes to step inside, even though it's custom. He left them planted firmly at the doorway, as if he was ready to bolt. They offered him tea. He declined. That alone should have told me how serious things were. Grandpa never refused tea. He hugged me once, too tight, his hands lingering at my shoulders like he was checking I hadn't already been hollowed out, then left without another word. The door closed, and his absence felt heavier than his presence. That night, I heard my parents arguing in the kitchen. Their voices rose through the thin apartment walls, bouncing off the tatami mats in my room. "Old superstition," my dad hissed. "He terrified the boy for nothing." "You didn't see his face?" Mom replied, her voice breaking. He looked like he believed it." "He's 12, Dad said. "Kids scare themselves. He probably saw a tall woman in the fields and imagined the rest. Don't humor this nonsense." I pulled the blanket up around my chin and pretended to be asleep. My manga lay open on the floor, but the words swam on the page. Part of me wanted to run into the kitchen and scream at them. She was real. I saw her. She saw me. But even as the thought formed, another voice whispered at the back of my skull. "If you name her here, she'll know you know she followed you." So I stayed quiet. Tokyo nights are noisy, but in a different way than the village. Out there, silence is alive. It prowls, it tests the walls, it waits. In the city, the noise is constant, like a dog chained outside your window. Air conditioners groan, scooters buzz, people shout in alleys, music thumps from bars. It should have drowned out everything else. But around midnight, I woke up to something that didn't belong. At first, it was faint, a vibration I thought was part of a dream. Then it thickened, threading itself between the traffic and the hum of the vending machines outside. Po, po, po. The sound froze my blood. I sat up in bed, my blanket sticking to my sweat. The apartment was dim, the orange glow from a street lamp leaking through the balcony curtains. They swayed gently, though the sliding glass door was shut. Po, po, po. I thought of the priest's warning in the village. Don't look, don't answer. But this was Tokyo. She couldn't be here. Spirits didn't take trains. Then something tapped the glass. Once, twice. Slow, deliberate. The sound was too high for someone standing on the balcony. Our unit was on the 4th floor. My skin went cold. The tapping stopped. For a moment, I almost convinced myself it was just the building settling, or a branch blown against the window. But there were no trees outside. Only concrete, wires, and a narrow street far below. And then came the voice. Akito. It was my mother's voice. Soft, coaxing, coming from the other side of the glass. Akito, it's hot in there, isn't it? Open the door, come out. You'll feel cooler out here. My throat locked. My mother was asleep down the hall. I could hear her muffled snore through the paper-thin wall. The voice persisted. It's all right. Just slide the door open. Just a little crack. The syllables stretched strangely, like the words were being pulled on invisible strings. My fingers dug under my pillow until they found the paper charm the priest had given me. The ink had smeared from my sweat, but I clutched it tight, my only anchor. The voice shifted. Akito, my father's tone now, firm but gentle. Don't be silly. Come to the balcony. Then Grandma's. Just one look, Akito. Just look. That's all. Each time, the voice carried the same undertone, like a drum beat under music. Po, 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 po. I pulled the blanket over my head and stayed like that, rigid, every muscle trembling, while the city outside carried on as if nothing was wrong. Motorbikes roared, someone laughed drunkenly in the street, and somewhere beneath it all, that impossible syllable pulsed steady as a heart. At some point, I must have passed out, because the next thing I remember was light pushing through the curtains. My alarm clock blinked 6:47. I shuffled into the kitchen, hollow-eyed. Mom scolded me for staying up too late with comics again. Dad sighed and muttered something about responsibility. I wanted to shout, "It wasn't manga. She was here." But before I could speak, I saw it. On the balcony glass, faint but undeniable, were prints. Not handprints, not smudges from a nose pressed against the glass. They were too large, too high, positioned near the top of the sliding door, as if someone impossibly tall had leaned down from above, bracing against the window, watching me sleep. The shape of them made me sick. The fingers weren't splayed like a human hand. They dragged downwards, long, stretched, as though something had melted against the glass before vanishing. "Akito, eat your breakfast," Mom said, not noticing. I didn't say a word. I sat down at the table, staring at my untouched rice, my skin crawling, because deep down, even at 12, I understood something that I didn't have words for yet. If I told them, they wouldn't believe me. Worse, naming her here in the city would tell her I knew she had followed me, and I wasn't ready for what she'd do with that knowledge. That night, I slept with the blanket pulled over my head again. The charm clutched so hard, it cut into my palm. I thought if I didn't look, maybe she'd get bored. Maybe she'd leave. But spirits like her don't get bored. They get patient. And patience is worse. By the second night back in Tokyo, I had convinced myself it might have been a hallucination. Stress. A 12-year-old brain carrying too much of Grandpa's fear. Maybe I'd wanted to believe in her so badly that my body produced the sounds, the prints, the voices. That theory lasted exactly until the next time I heard po, po, po. But this time, I wasn't the only one. It started in class, 3 days later. I went back to school like nothing had happened, but I felt thinner, stretched out, as if something had taken a slice of me and left me lopsided. My friends noticed. They asked why I looked like a zombie. I laughed it off, blaming summer heat and the countryside. My homeroom teacher, Sato Sensei, assigned us into small groups for a project. I ended up sitting with Yuta, a boy I'd known since kindergarten. He wasn't my best friend. He was the quiet type who spent breaks sketching monsters in the back of his notebook. But he was steady, the kind of kid who never bullied and never tattled. At lunch, we traded bites of food. He offered me some of his mother's karaage, Japanese fried chicken. I gave him a piece of my oversalted tamagoyaki. He chewed slowly, looking at me with those dark, thoughtful eyes of his. "You look like you didn't sleep," he said bluntly. I shrugged. Didn't. Why not? I opened my mouth to make up something about late-night manga, then shut it. For some reason, with Yuta, lying felt harder than telling the truth. I didn't want to dump everything on him, but something slipped out anyway. "There's someone watching me," I muttered. He tilted his head. "Like a stalker?" That word hung between us, heavier than it should have been. I laughed weakly. "Yeah, something like that." That night I tried again to sleep early, clutching the paper charm under my pillow. For a while it worked. I drifted in that half place where you don't dream, but you don't know you're awake either. Then I heard it. Po, po, po. The sound came from the balcony again, weaving into the thrum of the city, slow and patient. My chest turned to stone. This time, though, something else happened. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. A text. At midnight. I fumbled it open with shaking hands. It was from Utah. "Hey, you awake?" "Yeah," I typed back. There was a pause. Then, I heard something weird, like someone outside. It said, "Poe." I nearly dropped the phone. The blood drained from my face. He was miles away in another ward, and he had heard it too. "Don't look," I typed back in a frenzy. "Don't answer it. Just ignore." No reply. My stomach twisted. I imagined him curious, pulling open his curtains, looking out into the night. Then the phone buzzed again. Too late. I stared at the words until my vision blurred. My heart clawed inside my ribs. I typed back, "What did you see?" The typing dots appeared, paused, disappeared. Finally, his message came. A woman, tall, over the streetlight, looking down. The phone slipped from my hand and hit the futon. My mouth went dry. I wanted to throw up. The next morning, Utah looked pale, eyes sunken. At recess, he pulled me aside, voice low. "She followed me home last night," he whispered. "I closed the curtains, but I think she knew I saw her." I grabbed his arm. "Don't tell anyone. Not your parents. Not the teachers." "Why not?" "Because if you say her name, she knows." He stared at me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. He didn't ask how I knew. From that day, we were bound together. Two 12-year-olds carrying a secret too heavy for either of us. The following nights blurred into a pattern. I'd hear the sound, sometimes near, sometimes far, and then, like clockwork, a message would appear on my phone. "She's outside again. She called my name. She sounds like my grandma." The more Utah described, the worse it got. He said she bent over the electric wires, hair spilling down like curtains. He said she crouched at the corner of his street, impossibly long arms brushing the pavement. He said her face was a blur, hollow and wrong. The worst message came a week later. "She asked me to bring you." I didn't sleep at all that night. One Saturday afternoon, Utah came over to my apartment. We holed up in my room with the curtains drawn, trying to distract ourselves with video games. But every sound from outside, the rumble of a truck, the laughter of kids in the street, sounded like a signal, a warning. Around dusk, the air turned heavy, that thick stillness I remembered from the village. Utah paused the game, controller slipping in his hands. "Did you hear that?" he asked. I hadn't. But then, faint beneath the hum of the city. Po, po, po. This time, it came from two directions at once. My throat closed. We sat frozen, our game characters idling on screen while the sound pulsed again, closer. Then, knock, 3 times. Slow. At my balcony door. We didn't move. The knock came again, louder, rattling the glass. And then a voice, sweet, familiar. "Boys, let me in. You don't have to be afraid." Utah's face drained of color. "That's my mom's voice," he whispered. "No," I hissed. "Don't answer. Don't move." The voice called again, softer now, coaxing, promising. My skin crawled, and then, in unison, two voices spoke through the glass. One in my mother's tone, one in his. Akito. Yuta. The syllables stretched, twisting, until both voices slid together into the same impossible rhythm. Po, po, po. We stayed like that until dawn, wide-eyed, too afraid to blink. When the sun finally rose, the balcony glass was smeared with streaks. Not handprints this time. Something longer. Like hair dragged across it in the night. Yuta never came over again. His parents moved him to his grandmother's house in another prefecture within the month. He didn't tell me. I only found out because his school desk was empty one morning. But the night before he left, I got one last text from him. She says she's not done with you. After Utah was gone, the apartment felt emptier in a way I couldn't explain. It wasn't just that my only ally had disappeared. It was that someone had taken him because of me. His parents claimed they were sending him to his grandmother's place for better schools. But I knew. I knew what had whispered at his window. I knew who had asked him to bring me. And I knew she wasn't finished. The first week without him, I thought maybe she would leave. Maybe she had taken her interest elsewhere. I told myself it was like a fever. You suffer through it, then it breaks. For 3 nights in a row, nothing happened. I began to relax. I let myself read manga under the blanket again, even laughed at a dumb comedy show on TV. For a moment, I felt like a normal 12-year-old. Then, on the 4th night, I heard the knock. Not at the balcony, at the front door. It was around 11:30. My parents had gone to bed already, tired from another argument I pretended not to hear. I lay in my futon, staring at the ceiling, when I heard 3 slow knocks. Talk. 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 I froze. The apartment door was heavy, metal, the kind that amplifies every sound. I waited, hoping it was a drunk neighbor mistaking doors. Then came the voice. Akito. Software coaxing. My mother's voice. But my mother was asleep in the next room. I could hear her faint snore through the wall. "Let me in, Akito. You don't need to be afraid." My stomach clenched. I pulled the charm from under my pillow and gripped it so tight the paper tore. The voice changed. My father now, steady, patient. "Son, open the door. It's all right." Then Utah's voice. The breath caught in my throat. "Please, Akito, open it. It's cold out here." I curled into myself, shaking. I didn't answer. I didn't move. After a long silence, the voice laughed. Low. Wrong. It scraped the inside of the walls. And then, faintly, po, po, po. By morning, the hallway outside smelled like rain, though the weather had been clear. When I opened the front door to take out the trash, I saw white scratches gouged into the paint at the height of a grown man's chest. Long, dragging scratches. I shut the door quickly, and told no one. Over the next weeks, it escalated. The knocking came almost every night. Sometimes at the balcony, sometimes the front door. Once even against the bedroom wall that bordered the stairwell. Always slow, always patient, and always followed by voices. Sometimes they were my parents, sometimes Yuta. Once it was my grandmother, calling in the gentle tone she used when offering tea. But always beneath it was the same mechanical rhythm, steady as a metronome. Po, po, po. I tried to tell my parents once. I waited until breakfast, when Dad was reading the newspaper and Mom was stirring miso soup. "Someone keeps knocking at night," I blurted. They both looked up, startled. "Knocking?" Dad asked. "Who?" "I don't know, but they call my name. They sound like..." I stopped myself. I couldn't say the names. Mom frowned. "Maybe a prank? Some neighbor kids?" Dad shook his head. "This is a safe building. Nobody would do that." He folded the paper, already dismissing it. "You're letting your imagination run wild. Too many ghost stories with your grandfather." "I'm not making it up," I snapped, voice shaking. They exchanged a glance. That pitying glance adults use when they've decided you're wrong. Dad sighed. "That's enough. No more scary stories before bed." And that was it. The conversation was over. That night, when the knocking came again, louder than ever, I bit my pillow to stop myself from screaming, because now I knew I was alone in this. One evening, I stayed late at cram school. By the time I got back, the sun had dipped low, turning the buildings copper. I climbed the stairs to our apartment, my bag heavy on my shoulder. As I reached our floor, I froze. The hallway was lined with ofuda, paper charms like the ones the priest had used in the village, pasted along the wall near our unit. I recognized the brush strokes, the black ink bleeding slightly into the paper. For a moment, I thought Grandpa had come secretly, but as I stepped closer, my stomach dropped. The charms weren't right. The brush strokes looked warped, jagged, as though copied by someone who didn't understand the characters. And they weren't pasted at child's height, or even an adult's. They were smeared high on the wall, near the ceiling, as if someone impossibly tall had leaned down to place them. The edges were wet, glistening with something that wasn't glue. Something darker. Blood. I bolted inside, slamming the door, heart hammering in my throat. My parents asked why I looked so pale, and I mumbled about the heat. I didn't dare tell them what I saw. That night, I woke to a sound I hadn't heard before. Breathing. Not my parents' soft breathing through the wall, not my own ragged gasps, but heavy, deliberate breaths coming from just outside my bedroom window. Long inhales, slow exhales, as if something was standing there, leaning down to listen through the glass. I clutched the blanket to my face, praying for it to stop. My eyes burned with tears. Then came the whisper. Not my mother's voice, not my father's, not anyone I knew. Just a hollow, sexless whisper pressing against the glass. Open. My chest seized. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. The whisper grew harsher, teeth grinding on the syllable. Open! Then the glass shuddered, rattling in its frame, though no wind blew outside. Pull, pull, pull. The syllables vibrated in my bones. I bit my arm until it bled just to stay silent. In the morning, I found condensation smeared across the window pane, as though someone had pressed their face against it, breathing, fogging the glass. Except the imprint was too high. Far too high. Like someone had bent down from the roof to peer in. I don't know how many nights passed like that. Time blurred. I stopped doing homework. I stopped caring about anything but keeping the blanket pulled tight and the charm under my pillow. My grades slipped. My teachers scolded. My parents argued louder, sometimes about me, sometimes not. But every night, she was there, knocking, whispering, breathing. And I began to realize something terrifying. She wasn't just trying to get in, she was already inside. Because sometimes, late at night, when the apartment was silent except for my heartbeat, I'd hear it. The soft creak of a footstep in the hallway. Not my parents. Someone taller. At this point, I realized waiting wasn't going to save me. The knocks kept coming. The whispers grew bolder. The footsteps in the hallway stopped pretending to be anyone but her. I knew if I just sat there night after night, one day I'd slip. I'd answer the wrong voice. I'd open the wrong door. So I decided to fight back. It started in the school library. I skipped lunch and hid among the dusty shelves, pulling down every book I could find about yokai, spirits, hauntings. Most were children's anthologies with cheerful illustrations, but a few went deeper. Folklore of the Kanto countryside, collected oral traditions of Gunma Prefecture. I flipped through them hungrily, scribbling notes in the margins of my math notebook. I found mentions of Ona yokai, tall women, mountain crones, child snatchers, Yamauba, Kuchisake Ona, Oshiroi Baba, all terrifying in their own right, but none of them matched her exactly. But then I found a single line, buried in a footnote in a book that looked like no one had checked it out in 50 years. Some villages speak of the Hachishaku Ona, a woman 8 shaku tall, whose voice calls children from their homes. Protective charms are applied to windows and doors, though no record survives of permanent escape. 8 shaku, 8 feet. My stomach turned. It was her. The next day after school, I went to the small Shinto shrine near the edge of town. The priest was ancient, his skin like wrinkled parchment, his eyes cloudy but sharp. I bowed nervously and asked if there were charms for protection against a tall woman. He studied me for a long time, too long. Then he shuffled into the back room and returned with an Afuda charm, a strip of paper inscribed with thick black calligraphy. "Place this on your door," he said, "and this on your window. It may not stop her, but it may slow her." "How much?" I whispered. He shook his head. "Take them. But remember, she is patient." That night, I pasted the Ofuda carefully onto my door and window. I lay down, clutching the leftover scraps like they were a shield. At 3 a.m., the knocking came. 3 slow taps on the window. I squeezed my eyes shut. The charm fluttered slightly in the breeze. Then, from outside, her voice. "Akito." I pressed the pillow over my head. The knocking grew louder. The charm peeled slightly at the corner. Then suddenly, silence. I waited, trembling. When I woke in the morning, the charm was still there. But the ink had faded, as though something had licked it away. I went back the next day, desperate, begging the priest for stronger wards. He frowned. "If she has noticed you, boy, no shrine in this town can save you. Move away. Leave. Don't look back." "I can't," I said. "She'll follow." The priest's face darkened. He turned away, muttering, "Then may the gods pity you." He refused to give me more charms, but I didn't stop. I visited every shrine within cycling distance, making excuses to my parents. At each one, I asked about a tall woman who calls children. Some priests shook their heads. Others paled and refused to speak. At one shrine, a younger priest pressed a crude wooden amulet into my hand. "She preys on fear," he said. "If you resist her voice, if you don't answer, she weakens. But," his eyes flicked over my shoulder to the empty air, "she never dies." I wore the amulet around my neck for a week. It cracked in half while I slept. No one touched it. By the third shrine, I stopped asking directly. I pretended I was just curious about yokai. I learned that Hachishaku-sama wasn't old, not like other spirits. Her stories only dated back a few decades. Some priests muttered that she was newborn, a spirit born of modern fear. That didn't make me feel better. If anything, it made her worse. Because if she was new, then she was still growing, still learning, and maybe still hungry. I even tried the library in the city, snuck rides on the train, spent afternoons lost in stacks I barely understood. I found folklore journals, scattered mentions of rural, tall women legends, mostly dismissed as hoaxes or hysteria. One paper suggested these spirits weren't ancient at all, but viral, spreading like diseases from story to story, village to village. One line stuck with me. "The more she is feared, the stronger she becomes. The more she is named, the more she is real." I closed the journal with shaking hands. I had been feeding her all along. By the end of that month, I had paper charms pasted on every door and window, amulets tied to my wrists, books stacked under my pillow. My parents thought I'd gone insane. Dad shouted at me for wasting money. Mom quietly pulled the charms down when guests came over embarrassed. But I didn't care. If superstition was all I had, I would drown in it. It didn't work. None of it worked. The charms burned to ash. The amulets cracked. The prayers faded like smoke. And the more I tried, the more she mocked me. The voices grew sharper, the knocks more insistent. One night, she whispered through the door in Utah's voice, "You can't keep her out forever." And then, in her own voice, layered beneath his, "Po, Po, Po." I gave up after that. I tore down the last of the charms and stuffed the books into the closet, because no matter how hard I tried, nothing worked. And worse, every effort only seemed to remind her that I was still fighting, still afraid. That was when the phone rang late one evening, a landline call, rare in our house even back then. Dad answered first. His voice clipped. Then he looked at me. "It's for you." My stomach lurched. Nobody ever called for me. Not unless... I picked up, hand trembling. "Hello? Akito." Grandpa's voice. I almost cried with relief. "Grandpa, you won't believe it." I know. He cut me off, his voice low and urgent. Listen to me. You must not speak of this to your parents. They don't understand. They won't. But you've seen her. I gripped the receiver. I tried to stop her, Grandpa. I tried charms, shrines. They can't stop her, he said sharply. They were never meant to. They only buy time. And you've bought too much already. My chest tightened. What do you mean? There was a long pause, only the static breathing between us. Then he said, almost reluctantly, there have been others. In the village. Boys like you. She marked them, and they were gone within weeks. Some only days. None of them lasted this long. My mouth went dry. So why me? That's what frightens me, he whispered. She must like you. She must want you close. Akito. She's keeping you, feeding slowly, ripening you. The words curdled in my gut. I wanted to argue, to scream at him for saying such a thing, but my throat locked up. Then, faintly, I heard something else. Another breath. Another presence, pressed against the line. Grandpa's voice stuttered. Don't trust the voices. Don't open the door. No matter who calls to you. The line crackled violently, his voice warped, stretched, and then clear and low. Open the door. My blood froze. Grandpa? Silence. Then, in the exact same cadence, the exact same rasp. Akito. It's me. Open the door. Quickly. I slammed the receiver down, my heart pounding. When I turned, Mom and Dad were staring at me from the living room. Dad frowned. What was that about? Nothing, I stammered. Just Grandpa checking in. But my voice cracked, and my face gave me away. Mom's eyes narrowed. It's that nonsense again, isn't it? About ghosts and curses. It's not nonsense. The words burst out of me, high and desperate. She's real. She's here. Dad's face hardened. He slammed the newspaper on the table. Enough. Do you think we don't have enough problems without you playing along with your grandfather's superstitions? I flinched. Mom turned back to her laundry, muttering, "We should cut him off. This is getting out of hand." I wanted to scream, to tell them about the blackened talisman, about the hair snagged in the doorframe, about the voice on the phone that wasn't Grandpa's. But I knew it wouldn't matter. So I shut myself in my room. That night, I didn't dare sleep. I sat cross-legged on my futon, clutching the old amulet around my neck. At exactly midnight, the phone buzzed again. The caller ID said, "Grandpa." My hand hovered over the receiver. Every part of me screamed not to pick it up, but I did. Hello. Silence. Then, Akito. The same voice, the same rasp, but wrong. Too smooth. She's at your door. Don't be afraid. Just open it. I turned slowly toward the sliding door. My heart hammered. From the other side came 3 knocks. Then Grandpa's voice again. "It's me. Let me in." I dropped the phone. It clattered to the tatami. From the receiver, faint but insistent, came the sound. Po, po, Po! I pressed my hands over my ears, curled under the blanket, rocked back and forth until the sound faded. When I woke, the phone was dead. No call log, no dial tone. I used a payphone after school the next day, sneaking behind the gym. Grandpa answered, alive, confused, insisting he hadn't called me in days. "She's testing you," he said. "Learning your trust. Don't answer, don't open. Promise me." I promised. But I already knew how close I had come. Because when the knocking came again that night, 3 heavy taps on my bedroom door, I almost answered. Because the voice that followed wasn't Grandpa's. It was Utah's. "Please, Akito, let me in. She won't stop until you do." My chest tightened. My hands shook. Utah had been gone for weeks. His parents said he'd moved. Teachers whispered he'd transferred. But I knew the truth. I'd seen the bundle of children's shoes by the cemetery. And now his voice was outside my room. I pressed my ear to the door. "Utah," my voice cracked. "Yeah," the voice whispered. "It's me. Please, I'm cold. She won't let me back inside unless you open the door." Every muscle in my body screamed to run. But another part of me, the part that still wanted to believe my friend was alive, trembled toward the latch. Then I stopped. Something was wrong. Utah's voice always wavered when he was scared. He tripped over words, whispered too fast. But this voice was calm. Too calm. And underneath it, faint but certain, I heard it. "Po, Po, Po." I staggered back from the door, tears stinging my eyes. "You're not him?" I whispered. The voice laughed softly. "Not yet." The chain rattled. The wood bowed inward as if something was leaning against it. Then silence. When I dared look again, a long strand of black hair had slipped under the doorframe. The next morning, Dad noticed the hair in the hallway. He frowned, muttering about kids playing tricks. But Mom wasn't fooled. She turned pale, her hands trembling as she swept it up. At breakfast, nobody spoke. The silence was heavier than any scream. Finally, Dad slammed his chopsticks down. "Enough of this nonsense. This family is falling apart because of old fairy tales. Akito, you will stop talking about her. Do you understand?" I didn't answer. Mom whispered, "Don't shout. She might hear." Dad's face darkened. He pushed back from the table and stormed out, the door slamming hard enough to rattle the frames. For the first time, I realized Mom believed. That night, I heard arguing from my parents' bedroom. "She's not real," Dad hissed. "She is," Mom whispered. "I saw her shadow in the hall. You're feeding his delusions. You heard the knocking too." The room went quiet after that. Too quiet. I pressed my pillow over my ears and prayed for morning. 2 days later, the phone rang again. I snatched it up, desperate for Grandpa's voice. It came, thin and weary. "Akito, are you still holding on?" "Yes," I whispered. "But she's getting stronger. She's using voices, Utah's voice. My parents—" "I warned you," he said. "She never lets go. She only waits. You must be stronger than the voices. Promise me." "I promise," I said, tears blurring my vision. A pause. Then faintly, "Good boy. I'll see you soon." I froze, because he had never called me good boy in my life. The line crackled, and then underneath, the laugh. Low, patient. Po, po, po. I didn't sleep that night. I kept the light on, clutching the old amulet. At dawn, the phone rang again. This time it was Grandma's voice. She was crying. "Akito, your grandfather. He passed away in the night." My stomach dropped. "How?" I whispered. She sobbed. "I woke up and he was gone. His face..." Her words broke into static. They said it was his heart, but I know she was here. The line went dead. I dropped the phone. My vision tunneled. Grandpa. Gone. The only one who believed me. The only one who tried to protect me. And she had taken him too. That evening, Dad came home pale, holding his coat like armor. "We're going back to the village," he said flatly. "For the funeral." Mom nodded silently, eyes red. I didn't argue, because I knew. She wanted me back there. That night, I heard Utah's voice outside my window again. "See you at the funeral, Akito." Then the low, patient echo. Po, po, po. We drove back to the village in silence. The roads narrowed, the mountains pressed closer, and the air thickened with that summer weight I remembered too well. Every curve of the road, every glimpse of the rice paddies, felt like stepping back into a memory I'd been running from for 10 years. Mom cried quietly into her handkerchief. Dad drove with both hands tight on the wheel, his jaw clenched so hard I thought his teeth would crack. I sat in the back, staring at the fields rolling past. My chest ached. Grandpa was gone. The one person who had believed me, who had tried to protect me, was gone. And in the hollow of that loss, I could feel her moving closer. Grandma's house hadn't changed. The same garden wall, the same sagging gate, the same persimmon tree bowing over the roof. When she opened the door and saw me, she didn't smile. She just pulled me into a trembling hug. "Why did you come back?" she whispered in my ear. "You should have stayed far away." But I couldn't. Not now. The funeral was held the next day. The house was crowded with villagers in black. Tatami mats lined with cushions, incense thick in the air, curling from the Butsudan altar where Grandpa's photo sat. He looked stern, as always, glasses catching the candlelight, but softer somehow too, as if the photograph itself carried sorrow. I knelt, bowed, pressed my hands together. The sutras droned around me, voices of old men and women rising and falling in rhythm. When I looked up again, I caught the stares. The villagers were watching me, some openly, some from the corners of their eyes, their lips moving in whispers. "He's still alive. How is that possible? She hasn't finished with him yet." My skin crawled. I wanted to shout at them, demand answers, but the chants rose louder and I bowed again instead, my forehead pressed to the tatami. That evening, after the guests left, I stepped outside to breathe. The sky was bruised purple, cicadas buzzing. The rice paddies glowed faintly in the twilight, their water reflecting the first stars. That was when an old man shuffled up to me. His back was bent, his eyes cloudy, his cane tapping against the stones. You, he rasped. You're the boy she marked. My throat tightened. Yes. His blind eyes seemed to look straight through me. The others, they didn't last. A week, a month at most. But you, he shook his head slowly. She has been feeding on you for years. Why? My voice cracked. Why me? His toothless mouth curled. Because you are her banquet. You are her long harvest. She fattens you with fear, seasons you with sorrow. She doesn't want you quickly. She wants you perfect. I staggered back, bile rising in my throat. That's insane. But deep down, I already knew. The old man chuckled softly, tapping his cane. When she comes, boy, it will not be to kill. It will be to savor. He shuffled away before I could speak again, leaving me trembling in the dusk. That night, the village shut down early. By 9, every door was bolted, every window sealed, curtains drawn tight. The streets were empty, as if the place had been abandoned. Grandma muttered prayers as she locked each window. Don't look out, she warned me, no matter what you hear. But I couldn't stop myself. Near midnight, I slid my shoji screen open just a crack and looked. The paddies shimmered under the moonlight. Mist curled low over the fields. The cicadas had gone silent. At first, nothing, just the slow sway of the trees. Then the mist parted, and I saw her. She towered over the fields, taller than the trees, taller than the telephone poles. Her white dress rippled like a sail, her arms dangling, fingers grazing the tops of the paddies. Her hair spilled in rivers across the water, black and endless. Her face was a blur, a hollow void where features should be. Yet I felt her gaze lock on me, piercing the thin paper screen, crushing the breath from my lungs. Her head tilted slowly, curiously, and then across the empty fields, her voice carried. Po, po, po. The sound vibrated through the earth, rattling the house, echoing in my bones. I ducked under my blanket, trembling, heart pounding so hard it hurt. But even hidden, I could still hear it. Closer. Po, po, po. And then, in a voice that wasn't hers, a voice I knew too well. Akito. I don't remember falling asleep. I only remember waking at dawn, drenched in sweat, the house silent, Grandma sitting at the altar whispering prayers. She didn't ask if I'd heard. She already knew. The villagers didn't look at me that day. They kept their doors shut, their eyes averted, as though being near me might draw her closer. I was alone, and I knew, deep down, that coming back had been a mistake. Because she hadn't been waiting in Tokyo. She had been waiting here, for me to return. When dawn finally pried the night off the village, I felt like I'd been skinned. The house still smelled of incense and old tatami, and every creak in the beams sounded like a throat clearing before my name. Grandma poured tea with hands that shook, and Dad spoke in the tidy, useful sentences of a man replacing words for grief with logistics. The plan was simple. Help clean, greet the final visitors, and drive back to Tokyo before nightfall. I went to the entryway to put on my shoes and found a small parcel on the step. No knock, no voice, just a brown paper package, string-tied, beaded with dew. My name was written across it in a neat, careful hand I recognized before my brain supplied it. Yuta. The breath left me. I looked down the lane. No one. The persimmon leaves barely moved. For a second, I waited for the joke, for someone to shout, "Got you," for the world to return to the version where things make sense. It didn't. Inside the wrapping was a sketchbook, the same brand Yuta always used. The cover was frayed, the corners dog-eared, the elastic band furry with use. A note was stuck under the band, torn from a notepad, 3 lines long. If this finds you and I don't, use what I learned. Don't believe the first voice. The bottom right corner showed the faint shadow of an inked thumbprint. I took the book to the far room, the one that once held futons stacked to the ceiling, and sat at the low table. The first page was a drawing, a woman in white towering over a schoolyard fence, hair like rain. The graphite lines were delicate, obsessive. He'd erased and redrawn until the paper thinned. Beneath it, in pencil, he had written, "She doesn't only come for you in summer." The next pages were sketches and fragments, rice fields at dusk, a balcony seen from below, perspective warped as if drawn by someone standing in the street and looking up. My apartment's sliding door, the chain drawn to scale and annotated with measurements. Between the drawings were notes, not paragraphs. Yuta's thoughts lived in short, precise strokes, like he was saving ink for what mattered. First time I heard Poe was last year. Didn't tell you. Thought I was going crazy. Mimicry improves with exposure. The longer she watches, the more precise the voice becomes. She learns your pauses. She likes thresholds, doors, windows, fence tops, boundary places. Paper charms work only if the ink stays dark. When they fade, it means she's licking the words away. There were dates. The earliest was months before I'd ever admitted to him what I'd heard. He had been carrying her alone, and he hadn't told me. Shame gutted me. Tucked into the middle of the book was a folded photocopy from some academic journal. Half the title cut off, the staple rusted. The abstract was underlined twice. Certain modern, tall woman apparitions exhibit measure binding. They are named for length and constrained by it. Rituals that confuse, steal, or break their measure may reduce their reach temporarily. Yuta had scrawled beside it, "Hachishaku is her name. Take one away and she loses count." On the next page, he had drawn a carpenter's shaku ruler. Old style, wooden, 8 segments inked with tiny marks. He'd shaded one segment dark and written, "Steal this." Another note, arrowing to the shaded segment. Old men in the next town say she hates being mismeasured. If you can make her 7 shaku at the moment she calls, she stumbles. Need a true shaku stick? Temple storehouse? I heard myself whisper, "What temple?" As if he could answer. There was more. 3 mirrors facing each other. Creates an infinite corridor. Spirits that travel in lines get trapped counting reflections. Counting sickness. Red thread braided with hair, yours, looped around the mirrors. Sea salt in a clay jar. Bells of bronze. 108 rings. Do not speak her name while binding. Do not answer any voice. Witness outside to keep time. Origin needed. Not any roof. Her roof. Old shrine in Cedar Forest. The one they don't talk about. Ask a drunk, not a priest. I turned the page and found a list of attempts. Places he'd pasted charms. Temples that sold him ofuda without questions. The night he spent crouched in his grandmother's toilet alcove because the priest's wife said bathrooms were safe, like little shrines. Next to that, in small letters, she knocked on the tank. A penciled map followed. The cedar forest sketched in strokes so fast, The graphite still looked wet. An X marked a bend in a creek. A second X, deeper in, held a single word. Door. I kept reading. If mirrors break, stop. Whatever gets out of the corridor will be angrier for having learned to count faster. If bell stops, start again from 1. No skipping. If you hear your own voice from the next room, tie the red thread around your mouth. Don't let her loan it back to you. If she says, "Good boy," it's not me. My hands shook. He had written that line before my last call with Grandpa. Halfway from the end, Yuta had pasted a newspaper clipping. Local, grainy, the kind you don't notice unless your life is already falling apart. The headline, "Boy Missing Near Farm Road." The date was from months after he moved. Someone had circled the line, "Last seen carrying an art portfolio." He'd written beneath it, very small, "Not a runaway." A few pages later, the pencil dug deeper. The letters grew cramped, urgent. Found the shrine. Not a cage. A mouth with a door. The shaku stick is there. Old, in the eaves. One segment rotten. Maybe that's what they stole. Maybe the village bought time once. Bells in a box, mirrors cracked but usable. Salt clumped. I can try. If I don't write again, I tried. The last page was a letter he hadn't sent. Akito, if you are reading this, I waited too long to tell you. I didn't want to make it real for you. That was stupid. You were already in it. Maybe we both were from the first day in the yard. I'm going to try the corridor. If it works, I'll come back to Tokyo. If it doesn't, don't answer her when she sounds like me. Not even once. Don't let her borrow my voice to collect you. Tie the thread, steal a shaku, ring the bell. If there's anything like killing her, it won't be with a knife. It'll be with numbers. Yuta. I pressed my forehead to the paper. The room blurred. In the quiet, I heard how he must have sounded writing it, the pencil scratching like a small animal in a wall. He had been fighting long before I knew how to hold a charm properly. He'd found a path through the dark, thin as a spider's silk, but a path. Akito. Grandma's voice came from the hall, soft and uncertain. You should eat before you go. I wiped my eyes with the heel of my hand and tucked the sketchbook under my shirt like a heat pack. Coming. We left the village at noon. The sky was clear. The paddies shone. On the last curve before the highway, I looked back and imagined I saw the cedar line tilt, as if someone tall were stepping among the trees. The thought made the bell of my heart ring once, loud, then stay loud for miles. In the car, I opened the diary again, hiding it flat on my lap where Dad couldn't see. I traced the shaded segment on the drawn shaku stick until the paper grew warm. Steal a shaku. If she was 8 shaku because her name made her so, what would she be without one? Less than herself? Off balance? Killable? Yuta had put quotes around the word, kill, but the page smelled like possibility. By the time Tokyo's edges rose up, I had memorized the ritual until I could have recited it in my sleep. Mirrors, thread, hair, salt, bells, counting. A door that wasn't a door but a mouth, and the need for an origin. I also understood the other thing the diary had taught me. Yuta had gone missing after he moved. That awful word in the clipping wasn't a rumor anymore. He had taken his portfolio and walked down a farm road and disappeared into the place where names get put on wood in a shrine, and his voice kept showing up where he wasn't. Back home in my room, I spread the diary on the tatami and began inventorying my life. No bronze bells. I had a tin wind chime I knew would sound wrong. No clay jar. Mom had a ceramic pickles crock, maybe close enough. Mirrors. I had two, a cheap stand mirror and the square from the bathroom I could unscrew when she wasn't looking. Red thread? I could buy that. Hair? I touched the back of my head and felt the premonition of scissors. Salt. Easy. A shaku stick. Hard. The only real ones would be old, and the only old place I knew that had once kept such things was a shrine I only knew as a sketch on a map in a dead friend's book. I slept with the light on and the book open beside my pillow. I dreamed the corridor of mirrors, a hall of white narrowing into infinity, each reflection a smaller me, a smaller her, each of us counting in opposite directions. I woke to the sound of the elevator's cable in the shaft, humming like the throat of a bell. The next day at school, I skipped lunch and went to the public library instead. The folklore stacks had nothing on measure binding, but in a carpentry manual older than Dad, I found a diagram for a shaku, 30.3 centimeters per unit, 8 units to a stick, marks precise enough to shame a priest. I traced it onto graph paper because drawing it felt like pulling it closer. The old librarian watched me with the patient pity of someone who thinks a boy is copying from a gardening book to make the weeding feel like magic. On the way home, I ducked into a haberdashery and bought the brightest red thread they had. It came in a paper sleeve that smelled like dust. The woman at the counter said, "Festival?" And I said, "Something like that," and she didn't ask anything else. That night, as rain ticked on the balcony, I cut a lock of my hair and braided it with the thread. My hands shook at first, then steadied. The braid looked like a vein. I looped it around my wrist until my skin dented. The apartment was too small for the mirror corridor, but I made a prototype on my desk. 2 mirrors facing each other with a pocket mirror angled between. The infinite tunnel jittered with the poor glass. Somewhere down the line, my face stopped being my face and started being a smudge. When I leaned close, the smudge leaned too, but a beat late, as if it were waiting for a cue from someone taller. I rang the tin wind chime once. It sounded like a coin dropped in water. Wrong. Bells of bronze, Yuta had underlined. Temple bells. The sort that vibrate your teeth. At 3:03, as if she'd been reading over my shoulder, she knocked. 3 gentle taps on the window. The red braid tightened against my wrist like it had a will. I didn't look. The diary lay open to the page where Yuta had drawn the shrine, the X-marked door. I closed my eyes and counted to 8. When I opened them again, something had changed. The air felt measured. "Akito," she said in my mother's voice, perfectly casual. "Come get some water." I almost stood. The braid burned my wrist. I stayed on the floor. A second voice came from the hall, cheerful, tender, wrong. "Good boy. Come on." Every muscle in me went cold. "Not him," I said through my teeth. "Not him." I wrapped the braid once around my mouth and tied it at the nape of my neck. It tasted like metal and summer. The voices stopped. The city hummed. The rain patted the glass like fingers too long to drum. When morning came, the glass bore 3 arcs, high as a ladder rung. I pressed my palm to the biggest one and felt the ghost of warmth, like the backside of a hand that had just left. I took the diary to school again, then to the station, then home, as if carrying it would keep him near. I called the number in the clipping, even though I knew what I would hear. A polite voice at the prefectural office, the words "ongoing investigation," the warning not to interfere. I hung up before I had to say his name to a stranger. Saying a name was how you made space for someone at a table. Saying his to a clerk felt like pulling the chair out from under him. On the third night, I dreamed the cedar forest. I walked the path from Utah's map until the creek bent and the air grew thick. I saw the torii lopsided and the eaves sagging and, in the rafters, a slat of wood with tiny carved marks, units of measure, worn to shine by the backs of old hands. A segment at the far end looked eaten. I reached up. My fingers came away black like I'd touched a moth's wing. When I looked down, the black was hair. I woke with my hand in my mouth and salt on my tongue. The braid on my wrist was damp. Mom knocked on my door and asked if I was all right. I told her yes, because the truth was too much weight for both of us. She slid a bowl of rice through the doorway as if I were contagious. We ate close and separately, the way sad families do. "Let's move," Dad said a week later, sudden as a door blowing open. He didn't say it because he believed. He said it like a man who is lost and needs to change the furniture. New place, new start. This building is bad luck. I thought of the mirror corridor I couldn't build here, of the bells I couldn't find, of the shrine that wasn't in Tokyo at all. I thought of the shaku stick and the rotten segment, and of Utah's last line. If there's anything like killing her, it won't be with a knife. It'll be with numbers. "Okay," I said. That night I lay on the floor with the diary open to the map and the red braid around my wrist and my hair in my mouth, and counted to 8 and back to 1 until the numbers tasted like prayer. Rain hissed on the eaves. In the quiet between drops, a voice breathed into the room, not from the hall, not from the glass, but from the place where grief and hope learn to share a bed. "Ring the bell," it said, in Utah's voice. "Ring it until your teeth break." "Where?" I whispered into the braid. "Home," he said. The wind shifted. Something huge leaned on the building. The ceiling bowed a fraction, wood making a small noise as if remembering. From the window came the smallest tap, polite as a distant aunt. Then the old sound, kind as hunger. "Po, po, po." I didn't answer. I didn't move. I lay very still, measuring the length of my breath in units I didn't have yet, and thought of a stick of wood in a shrine, 8 shaku long, 1 segment missing, and the way a monster might stumble if her name didn't fit her anymore. In the morning, we signed papers for a high-rise. I packed the diary last. I slid it into my bag and felt the weight settle. When I lifted the bag, it felt like a bell. On the way out, I checked the hall one more time. At the far end, the light flickered once as if something tall had just stepped aside. I told myself the corridor was empty. I told myself the mirrors would work. I told myself numbers could be sharper than teeth. I told myself I would bring a shaku stick home from the forest and make her say her own name wrong. And for the first time in years, I felt something move in me that wasn't fear. It was small and ridiculous and alive. It was hope. It tasted like salt and metal and the paper edge of a page that had been turned so many times, the corner had gone soft. We moved again. Dad called it a fresh start. Mom called it bad luck. I didn't call it anything. I just packed Utah's diary into the bottom of my bag and watched the movers carry boxes like we were just another unhappy family reshuffling our lives in cardboard. The new apartment was higher, cleaner, colder. A high-rise on the edge of Tokyo, with tinted windows and a balcony that looked out across a sea of lights. Dad liked the elevator. Mom liked the way no one knew us here. I didn't like anything, but at least, in the anonymity of towers stacked on towers, I thought maybe she would lose me in the crowd. The first night in the new place, the air smelled like fresh paint and dust. I lay on the futon in my new room, listening to the building breathe. Pipes knocking, neighbors muffled through the walls, the wind clawing at the balcony rail. At 3:03 a.m., the elevator hummed. I pressed Utah's diary against my chest like scripture. The hum stopped outside my floor. Footsteps padded down the hall. 3 knocks tapped my door, and then a voice I knew too well, patient and smooth. Akito. I held my breath until dawn. She had followed. That was when I stopped waiting for priests and charms to save me. If anyone was going to fight her, it had to be me. And if Utah was gone, then I would fight for both of us. The next morning, I skipped school and went shopping. Red thread was easy. I found it in a sewing supply store near the station, packaged in a stiff paper sleeve. The clerk asked if it was for crafts. I said yes. I braided the thread with a lock of my own hair that night. My hands shook, but once the braid was done, I looped it around my wrist until the skin dented. It felt like a vein. Salt came from the grocery store. I bought a bag of sea salt and poured it into an old ceramic pickles jar I found in Mom's cupboard. The jar was heavy, earthy, satisfying. The mirrors were harder. I carried 2 cheap stand mirrors from a home goods store, sweating under their weight as I lugged them into the elevator. I set them in my room facing each other and angled a pocket mirror between them. When I looked inside, the reflections stretched into infinity. My face repeated again and again until it blurred. Somewhere down the corridor of images, the reflections weren't me anymore. They were taller. They tilted their heads a second too late. I slammed the mirrors shut and tied the braid around them. The bells were impossible. Yuta had written "bells of bronze," underlined twice. I tried with a tin wind chime from the balcony, but the sound was thin, metallic, wrong. It had no weight. So I haunted antique shops, pawing through dusty shelves, pretending I was looking for souvenirs. Once, in a back alley shop with a cracked lantern, I found a handbell. Bronze, green with age, etched with faint sutras. The shopkeeper squinted at me. "You don't need that," he said. "Yes, I do," I whispered, and handed him every coin I had. When I rang it that night, the sound filled the room, deep and heavy. It rattled in my teeth. I knew it was right. The hardest was the shaku stick. Yuta had written, "Steal a shaku." An authentic carpenter's shaku stick would be old, wooden, worn smooth from use. But every antique I found was too short, too new, or fake. Finally, in another shop near Asakusa, I found one. Cracked, faded, the edges gnawed by insects. 8 units etched into the surface, each 30.3 centimeters. The last segment was rotten, splintered. The shopkeeper frowned when I picked it up. "That one's broken. Bad luck." "I'll take it," I said. He shrugged. That night, I laid it across my desk and traced the rotten segment with my finger. 7 shaku, not 8. If her name bound her, maybe this would unbind her. My parents noticed nothing, or pretended not to. Dad buried himself in work. Mom drifted through the days like a ghost. Her prayers whispered over the sink. Once, she came into my room, saw the mirrors covered with cloth, the jar of salt, the braid around my wrist. She opened her mouth as if to speak. Then she closed it, turned, and shut the door. Weeks passed. I collected everything Yuta had written about: salt, bells, thread, mirrors, the shaku stick. I tested the ritual again and again, practicing until the braid bit my wrist raw and the bell made my ears ring. I felt ready. For the first time since, I wasn't just prey. I was preparing for a fight. One night I stayed awake, waiting. The room was ready. Salt thick in a circle. 2 tall mirrors facing each other with a small pocket mirror between them, stretching my reflection into infinity. Yuta's diary lay open at my side. The braid of red thread in my hair cut into my wrist and across my mouth. The bronze bell weighted heavy in my lap. The shaku stick lay across my knees, one segment rotten. At 3:03, the elevator groaned. The air in the apartment thickened. Footsteps stopped outside my door. 3 knocks. Akito! I rang the bell. The sound shook the walls. The voice faltered. Then the mirrors rippled, and she stepped inside. Her body unfolded like a nightmare blooming, taller than the ceiling, white dress brushing the walls, black hair flooding down the mirrored corridor. 1,000 reflections turned hollow eyes toward me. "You are mine," her voice said, inside and outside at once. Her arm shot through the glass. Fingers longer than my forearm slammed into the salt. The grains hissed, blackening where she touched. I swung the shaku stick down with all my strength. Wood cracked against her hand. The fingers bent backward and shattered into dark shards that dissolved on the tatami. She shrieked, a sound that shook the glass until it spider-webbed with cracks. But she didn't stop. Her hair whipped from the corridor, dozens of strands like ropes. They wrapped around my ankles, my waist, my wrists, tugging me toward the mirrors. The salt circle smoked where they touched, burning away. I thrashed, kicked, clawed, the braid on my wrist cutting deeper into flesh. "7!" I shouted through the gag, muffled but desperate. The mirrors convulsed. Her body spasmed, flickering taller, shorter, then taller again. I grabbed a broken shard of glass and slashed at the hair. Black strands split, spraying liquid cold as ice water across my skin. She reeled, howling. The corridor bent, reflections twisting into endless hallways of her face, all screaming at once. She came harder. Her second hand thrust through, smashing down on the floor inside the salt circle. The wood splintered. Her nails gouged the tatami. I struck again with the shaku stick, hammering at her wrist until the wood bruised my palms. The stick vibrated like it would snap. The bronze bell rattled, toppled, rolled. I lunged for it, hair tightening around my neck, choking me. My fingers closed on the handle. I rang it hard. The boom filled the room like a thunderclap. The hair recoiled, smoking, twitching. Her voice broke. "Po! Po!" Then static, warped and stuttering. The mirrors began to fight back. Every reflection showed her wrong. Some smaller, some stretched thin, some missing parts of her face. She stumbled, confused, turning from one reflection to the next, trying to hold her shape. I seized the moment. I rang the bell again and again, my arms screaming, each strike louder, heavier. Her body flickered. 8 feet, 7, 6. She convulsed, collapsing into different forms. "7!" I screamed. "7, not 8!" She bellowed, a sound that cracked the ceiling plaster. Her hair whipped like whips, smashing bookshelves, knocking over the altar. The salt circle scattered. I scrambled to redraw it with shaking hands, grains flying everywhere. Her hand lunged again, catching my shoulder. Cold burned through me like ice water in my veins. I swung the shaku stick up and smashed it into her forearm with a scream. The rotten segment snapped. The corridor erupted. Glass exploded outward in a storm of shards, slicing my arms, embedding in the tatami. The salt ignited in a hiss of white smoke. She reeled back, body twisted, limbs broken and reforming, head snapping at impossible angles. Her hollow face widened, stretching into a mouth that swallowed half the corridor. I rang the bell until my arms nearly tore from their sockets, screaming, 7, 7, 7! The mirrors collapsed in on themselves, reflections imploding. Her scream tore through me, rattling my bones. But then, silence. She folded in on herself, collapsing into the void, and was gone. I collapsed on the tatami, blood running down my arms, salt stinging the cuts. The shaku stick lay broken in 2 pieces beside me. The bell handle was cracked, but the room was quiet. The air was clear. The mirrors were empty, and she was gone. For the first time since that summer began, I wasn't afraid. I was 12 years old, cut and bleeding, but I had beaten her. The nightmare was over. I had killed Hachishaku-sama. It's strange how quickly time passes without you noticing. Years passed. I grew taller, older, my voice changed. The cuts on my wrist faded into pale lines, and the scar on my shoulder where her hand burned me became just another story my classmates didn't know. By the time I was 17, I no longer jumped at every knock. At 18, I could sleep without a light on. By 19, I almost forgot what her voice had sounded like. But I never forgot Yuta. His diary stayed with me, pages worn soft from years of rereading. Sometimes, on quiet nights, I would open it just to trace his handwriting with my finger, reminding myself that he had fought first, that he had taught me how to fight. I whispered thanks to him in the dark. I promised I'd live for him. I'd carry both of us forward. I got into university. I moved into a small apartment near campus. I studied late, worked part-time jobs, ate instant noodles at my desk. Life felt almost normal. Sometimes, when I caught my reflection in the window late at night, I would see the 12-year-old me staring back, wide-eyed, clutching the broken shaku stick. But I'd blink, and it was just me again. I told myself it was memory, that it was proof I'd survived. The first email came when I was 20. I was working on an essay in the library, eyes blurry from the screen, when my phone buzzed. New mail. The sender name made me freeze. Yuta. I stared at it for a full minute, unable to breathe. Then I opened it. Subject: long-time message. Hey, it's me. Do you remember the summer at your grandparents' place? I've been watching. You did good. You lived. I'm proud of you. My hands shook so hard I almost dropped the phone. It had to be a joke. Someone using his account. A cruel prank. But the words, "I've been watching," sounded so much like him. Like Yuta leaning against the schoolyard fence, grinning, pretending not to be afraid. I cried right there in the library. For the first time in years, I let myself believe maybe he hadn't been taken. Maybe the ritual had freed him too. That night, I reread the email a dozen times. I couldn't stop smiling through the tears. I replied, "Yuta? Is it really you? Where are you?" I waited all night. At 3:03 a.m., my phone buzzed again. Subject: "I'm close message. I'm nearby. I can see your window. You don't have to be alone anymore. Just open up." My stomach dropped. No, it couldn't be. But even as I told myself it was impossible, I found my eyes sliding to the window. The glass was black, reflecting my room. My own face stared back. For a moment, just a moment, I thought I saw another face leaning over my shoulder. I yanked the curtain shut. I didn't sleep. The next morning, there was another email. Subject: "Don't ignore me." Message: "You know my voice. You know it's me. We can be together again. Just answer when I knock." My hands trembled as I deleted it, but it didn't matter. Because that night, the knocking came again. 3 slow taps on the door. And a voice. Akito. Yuta's voice. I pressed my hands over my ears. I whispered Yuta's last warning from the diary. "Don't let her borrow my voice to collect you." The knocking grew louder. Another email buzzed on my phone. I glanced at the screen. Subject: "Open the door, message. Please, I'm cold. I need to come inside." The phone buzzed again. Another email and another. My inbox filled, message after message, each one shorter, more insistent. "Open, open, open," until the last one. Subject: "Po, po, po." I dropped the phone. My chest froze. The knocking stopped. The silence pressed in, and I knew. I hadn't killed her at 12. I had only given her time to learn. The next morning, I sat staring at Yuta's diary on my desk. The words blurred. His last line burned in my head. "If there's anything like killing her, it won't be with a knife. It'll be with numbers." But now, even numbers felt useless. Because she had adapted. She had learned to write, to send emails, to mimic not just voices but words on a screen. And she had found me again. I thought I had killed Hachishaku-sama, but she was back. And this time again, with Yuta's voice. My dorm at my university was a long, humming hallway above a ramen place that never seemed to close. The stairs always smelled like broth and rain. I met people whose faces didn't come with my childhood attached. Rio, who taped his lecture notes to the wall and said he learned better if the room looked like a crime scene. Satoshi, who wore the same gray hoodie all winter and never lost at cards. May, who drew stars on her knuckles during seminar and pretended she didn't cry at movies. They were the kind of friends you make because you all happen to be walking home the same direction after midnight. We ate under fluorescent lights and called it fine dining. We blamed the trains when we were late and our alarm clocks when we weren't. We promised we'd take care of each other in the big, indifferent city. I kept Yuta's diary in my bag like a talisman. I told myself it was sentimental. Not fear. Not really. The first bad thing happened in spring, after midterms, when the sakura turned to mush and made the sidewalk slippery. Rio went downstairs for a cigarette and didn't come back. We waited 10 minutes, then 30, then 2 hours. Someone said he'd probably met someone. Someone else said that was Rio's style. We called his phone. straight to voicemail. The police came the next day. They searched the alley and the river path and the little park where the swings are always wet, even in sun. They said words like "no sign of foul play" and "we'll be in touch." Satoshi stared at the floor. May folded, unfolded, refolded the same napkin until it fell apart. That night at 3:03 a.m., my phone buzzed. New email. Sender. Ryo. Subject. Found a shortcut. Message. Open up. No body, no explanation, just that. I stood in the dark with the phone lighting my face and felt the old cold push its fingers into me. Then the knocking came. 3 deliberate taps, like a metronome teaching a child the beat. "Akito," said Ryo's voice through the door. I forgot my keys. I put my palm on the wood. The grain felt warm, as if something with skin was leaning against the other side. Po, 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 said the building, almost shyly. I didn't open it. I curled up on the floor and waited until the light coming through the curtains turned from blue to gray. The police asked again. They asked all of us. They asked me the most. I knew why. I looked like a boy who knew something. In the mirror at the station, under fluorescent lights, I looked like a boy who had learned to hold his breath. 2 weeks later, Satoshi disappeared after a late lab. He texted a photo of the street on his walkback. Puddles reflecting neon, a cat looking accused. He never arrived. The cat belonged to no one. That night, at 3:03, my inbox filled itself while I watched. Satoshi. 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 The subject lines learned my name, learned the distance between words I don't share with anyone. "You're awake, aren't you? Help me come downstairs, open the door. It's raining, open, open, open." The last one was empty. No body text, just an attachment I didn't open and 3 dots in the subject line that said everything. May stopped sleeping in her room. She slept on the floor of mine, back to back with me, our shoulders touching like we were trying to convince our bodies we were still here. The janitor said he saw a tall woman on our floor, and then said he hadn't. May started wearing earplugs. I didn't. The sounds get in either way. She vanished in summer. She told me she was going to karaoke with friends from her seminar and sent 3 photos. A microphone made of gold plastic, a plate of fries, a stranger's hand making a peace sign. I like to think she sang her song before she left, whatever song it was, even if it was a joke one, even if she laughed halfway through. At 3:03, the electricity dimmed and came back wrong. My phone buzzed. Subject, stage fright. Message, Akito. Help. I put the phone in the freezer and stood in the kitchen with my forehead against the door until my skin went numb. After that, I started disappearing from people before they could disappear from me. I stopped group chats before anyone made new plans. I told myself it was kindness. I told myself it was quarantine. It didn't help. She just ate the ones I already had, the way a storm pulls what it has time to pull and moves on. A detective with a notebook asked me if I'd ever been in trouble before. He asked me if any of my friends were depressed. He asked me if I believed in ghosts. I laughed and said no. He looked relieved. I wanted to tell him relief is just fear's cheaper cousin. We all buy it when we're low on cash. At night, the emails came like rain. Some were long and kind, using phrases only the real people would know. Some were 3 words and a promise. Some were blank, but still somehow said my name. Behind all of them, she breathed. Patient, like someone learning a new language and discovering she loves it. I waited for her to take me. I apologized in my head to the people she took instead. I carried Utah's book everywhere until the cover felt like skin. One morning I woke up and decided that if she wouldn't come for me here, I'd go to the only place she ever told the truth. I packed a bag with clothes and the diary and a bell that no longer rang right. I left a note on my desk that said I'm sorry, then crossed it out and wrote I'll fix it, then crossed that out and wrote nothing. I bought a ticket. The train said it would take 3 hours. It took as long as it needed. If she wanted me, she could have me. The countryside is a different kind of loud. Crickets thick as thoughts. Crows that sound like scolding. Water that says the same sentence all day. My grandparents' house sat where it always had, pretending time is something that happens to other buildings. The persimmon tree leaned a little farther over the roof. The hedges had grown shaggy. The garden wall had the same hairline crack, a vein nobody repairs because they like seeing the skin's history at a glance. The key still worked. The air inside smelled like tatami, dust, and the faint sweetness of the incense my grandmother burned in the mornings. It was about 2 years ago when my grandma was moved to a nursing home since she couldn't take care of herself anymore. The villagers saw me at the corner store and looked away in the careful way that is actually staring. The woman who sold me tea asked, "Are you visiting?" and then didn't wait for the answer. An old man with cataract eyes touched my sleeve like he was blind and knew exactly where I was anyway. He's still alive. I heard someone whisper when I turned down the lane, as if that were indecent. The first night, I didn't hide. I turned on no lights. I opened the window in the room where the priest had pasted a Fuda when I was 12. I pulled down the last brittle charm and ground it between my fingers until it turned to confetti that smelled like ink. "Come," I said to no one in particular. "I'm here." I waited. The sounds organized themselves into a silence you can hear. At 3:03, the knocking came. 3 taps on the frame, not the glass. Polite. Patient. I slid the window wider. The night breathed in. She leaned into view. People think I'm exaggerating when I say how tall she is. I wish I were. Her head passed the roofline and kept going. The dress was white because nothing stays clean that high up. Her hair fell a long time. If you've never watched hair fall for more than a second, it does things you don't expect. Catches the air, changes shape mid-drop, chooses. Her face was a memorized blur, but I could tell she was looking at me. You can tell when you are prey. I had practiced what I would say. I had chosen my words the way you choose food for someone who hasn't eaten in weeks. Take me. It's me you want. End this. She tilted her head. It felt like watching a building think. "Please," I said. I heard the boy in me and didn't send him away. "Please take me. I'm tired." The corner of her mouth lifted, if you can call it a mouth. "Po, po, po," the field said. It might have been the wind. I held the window open until my arms ached. I leaned out like that might make me easier to catch. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might bruise itself against my ribs. She did not move. When dawn came, she was gone. The garden held a place where her shadow had been, a pale oval on the grass, like the spot under a tree after you cut it down. The second night, I said yes before the knocking. I stood in the yard with my hands at my sides and said it to the trees, to the sky, to the well, to the place on the garden wall where I used to press my ear to hear the insects in the hedge. I said yes until it didn't sound like a word anymore. She came. She did not take me. The third night I said her name. I said it wrong, then right, then the way my grandmother once whispered it when she thought I was asleep. I told her the things I would give up if she would just make this the last night. I told her what I wouldn't miss. I told her I would step where she told me to step. She looked at me the way someone looks at a fruit in a grocery store and decides whether to put it back. The villagers closed their doors, as if noise is what attracts disaster, not the other way around. A child fell on the road, and no one came out to help him until he stood up by himself. On the fifth night, I made offerings the way a person bargains with a fortune teller. Rice in a bowl, 3 persimmons from the tree, the bell dented like a tooth that survived a fight. I opened all the windows, all the doors, every drawer in the house. I stood in the middle and said, I don't care anymore. She came nearer that time. Her hand reached under the eaves and stopped an inch from my face, hovering like a choice. I thought if I leaned forward, I would fall into something that isn't distance. I think she could have breathed me in like a scent. She didn't. She pulled her hand back and watched me. Her patience is not like ours. It's not a thing that erodes. It's a thing that grows thicker as you notice it. Night after night, I chose her. Night after night, she refused. It broke something in me that had been stretched too thin for too long. When you are not chosen by a thing designed to devour you, you start to suspect you are being saved for a day it wants more. I stopped writing to people because all my sentences were the same. I stopped checking my phone. I stopped eating on a schedule. I started thinking in measures, the distance from wall to wall in shaku, the time between knocks and breaths, the number of nights a boy can go without being picked before he learns what the bin in a butcher shop feels like. The old man with the cataract eyes found me drinking tea I didn't want on the steps. He sat without asking. He made his cane part of the conversation by tapping it now and then. She doesn't want you unripened, he said, as if we were discussing fruit at market. You're still stiff in the wrong places. I said yes, I told him. That should count. It does, he said. For you. He patted my shoulder without touching me. When she takes you, boy, it won't be for mercy. It will be because the meal has finished cooking. I laughed and spilled the tea on my hand and felt nothing. There is only so much saying yes you can do before the word turns against you. It became a shape that cut my mouth. It became something I could taste but not swallow. I took down the old charms and burned the crumbs that remained. I unpasted every paper the priest had ever touched. I closed the altar doors gently because I am not a monster. I sat on the floor with Utah's diary and read until the graphite smudged my fingers dark, as if I could cover myself in the thing that had once saved me and tricked the world into thinking I could be saved again. I went out in the rain and stood where he and I had stood as boys, our heads barely above the garden wall, when she first looked over it with a patience that felt like the world tilting. I told the wet hedge I choose you, and the leaves didn't care. Leaves were busy being leaves. She came every night because she is kind in her way, the way a season is kind. She gave me what I asked for, proximity. She gave me the sight of the thing I feared. She gave me time to practice the face I would make when I was done being a person. Sometimes she used a voice to decorate the night. May, asking me to turn the music down, laughing like she always laughed after she said anything bossy. Ryo asking if I had fire. Satoshi saying my name like a secret handshake. I made the mistake of answering one of them once, saying I hear you, not even yes, just I hear you. And the grove of cedars leaned closer, and I understood something about manners at the wrong time. I wrote letters. I used polite forms. I apologized the way a guest apologizes for making too much work. I begged the way a person begs when they are tired of translating their need into palatable words. Nothing. The body learns a kind of dread that is not fear. It is an emptiness that eats from the edges inward. It is a gallery where the only painting is a door. I realized then what she was doing. It wasn't a refusal, it was a recipe. She was basting. She was letting me rest between stabs to make the meat tender. When I understood that, something in me stopped caring to make metaphors. I was tired of being clever in a situation designed to punish cleverness. I told the empty house, "If you won't take me, I won't make you." The house didn't answer. Houses never do unless you're listening for the wrong thing. I spent the day pretending to tidy the room I had been haunted in as a child. I folded a blanket twice, then unfolded it because the crease made me think of a mouth. I wiped the low table and caught my face in it, and didn't recognize myself, and realized that was the point of tables shining. I found a hair in a corner and knew it was mine, and still put it in a drawer like a thing that needs to be kept. By late afternoon, the light had the color of old bruises. The cicadas were a crowd at the back of a hall. A crow said my name the way crows can say anything. I sat with the diary open and wrote Utah on the empty inside back cover. Small, because the page felt like a space I had no right to take. Then I wrote, "I'm sorry," because apology is muscle memory here. Then I wrote nothing, because nothing is the truth you land on when you stop decorating it. There are many ways to end a story you are tired of telling. I did not look up methods. I didn't leave notes for the living. I made no diagrams. I did not calculate how long certain things take in certain circumstances. I am not offering instruction. This is not a map anyone should follow. I just decided I didn't want to be a room she visited anymore. I prepared myself in the smallest, poorest way a person can prepare. I made my body into a line that pointed at silence. That's when the knocking came. 3 taps, like always. Not louder than before, not more desperate. Considerate almost, as if she had been waiting in the hall so I could reach the simplest and worst thought by myself. I looked up without moving anything else. She was already inside. Not in the way that breaks windows, not with drama. She was just there, standing where a person stands when they don't want to scare you. And it's the scaring that something taller than a roof is choosing not to do that does the scaring. Her hair hit the floor and kept going, a spill that found corners and decided to live in them. The washy walls bowed a little, like lungs. She reached out, not quickly. If you have ever watched a crane lower a heavy thing, you know the speed. Her hand hovered. I could have counted the distance in breaths. I didn't. I had run out of counting for anything but this. When she touched my wrist, it was not cold. It was the temperature of a room after a long conversation you didn't want to end. It was the exact weight of being chosen. She smiled, or the closet version her face can do. Po, 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 she said, because it is our ritual to call things what they are. There are things they never tell you about being followed by a story like this. They don't tell you your yes will have to be said in 1,000 boring ways first, in every corridor, at every window, to every wrong voice. until you are emptied of spice and filled with something the chef calls readiness. They don't tell you about the politics of pity. It is a ladder, and you will learn where you stand on it in the eyes of people who gossip in grocery aisles. They don't tell you there is a patience beyond patience, and that it doesn't live in you. It lives in the thing that wants you slow-cooked. I learned that apologies are not currency. I learned that guilt is cheap salt. I learned that if you live long enough inside a mouth, you start speaking with the mouth's accent. I learned that Utah was right. If there's anything like killing her, it will be with numbers and mirrors and bells and more people than just a boy. I didn't have those anymore. I had a house and a window and a thing taller than a story. I learned the village had always understood that being alive isn't the same as being safe. I learned I was tired, and when she finally reached for me, her hand closing around my arm, I let her. The room tilted, the air thickened, and I knew this was the end I had been walking toward all along. But in that last moment, before she devoured me, I happened to glance sideways at the tall body mirror in the corner of the room, and there I was, smiling, a wider smile than I have ever had in my life.